Shay, you wrote a story this morning on LSU's NFL draft early departure. So players who were not out of eligibility that decided to go to the draft. You will have a story up on the players that exhausted their eligibility in the coming days. What were your takeaways? Where do you want to start when we talk about the players entering the draft from LSU?
Look, here's the big thing. We talk about Joe Burrow, number one pick. Jamar Chase, obviously a high first rounder as well, top 10 pick. They're not going to have that this year. The run on that is over. The big debate here is 8 early departures, meaning, as you said, guys who have still had eligibility remaining but decided to go pro. And I'll run you just down the positions here, and we can kind of talk about it before we get into the mailbag. The only offensive lineman in the group is Anthony Bradford. Started a ton of games at right guard. The only wide receivers are Kayshon, Boutte, and Dre Jenkins. The only defensive linemen, or two of them, an edge rusher and a tackle, would be Jaquelin Roy and B.J. Ojolari. The lone linebacker, Mike Jones Jr., and then you get a couple DBs, Mekhi Garner and Jay Ward. So all very familiar names for LSU fans. These guys, a couple transfers in there, but that started, a number of other guys who started multiple years. I mentioned maybe not, they're not going to have any top 10 picks. Here's the debate. Will LSU have any first rounders this year? And it is a tough call because mock drafts are what they are. They are people putting out often very similar lists and just reordering it of what the kind of top prospects are, who they are, what teams need different things. And by the time, Matty B, that you throw a few quarterbacks in there and some offensive linemen and some edge rushers, and you get through the bulk of what people take early, there's just a handful of receivers in this crop, a few probably, that are going to go above Kayshon. You wonder now, is Kayshon going to go in the middle to late first round, or is he one of the first guys off the board in the second round? T. Higgins was one of the first guys off the board in the second round. So no shame in that. You can obviously go in and immediately start in the NFL. But a lot of people, at least a year ago prior to his injury, remember, Kayshon's sophomore season, after he'd blown up as a freshman, he was leading the country in touchdowns. He was leading the country in receiving yards. And boom, he gets hurt 6 game in, didn't play again. And it felt like he wasn't the same after that. Just didn't have the same production, didn't seem to have that same burst. Those questions will all get answered at the combine and the NFL draft. Kind of look ahead towards pro day, combine. What his medicals look like, how he runs, how he tests, all those things will be big. It'll be really interesting to see. And then the other guy is B.J. Ojolari, and I think it's safe to say he might be a little bit behind Boutte on some boards, but he's also popping up maybe late first round, maybe early second round, an uber productive player, really solid player, I should say, as an edge rusher. His brother Aziz went early second round. I think he was a number 50 overall pick, so middle second round. A couple years back, he ends up breaking the Lions. I think it was their rookie sack record, might even be their team sack record right away. So NFL scouts know about his little brother. They know BJ is a big time player coming out of LSU. Those are the two guys. I don't know if you have a gut feel. For me, I'm just not able to tell you anything about Kayshon until he gets to the combine. And then it starts to come out of what does his medicals look like? Is he completely healthy? How does he run? With BJ, I feel like I know the answers. It's just going to depend on, he's going to interview great. I'm sure he's going to test well because he tested incredibly well out of high school. It's just a matter of, hey, who's ready to make a move on an edge rusher in the late first round or early second? Am I off base here? Is that what you see? Is there a chance LSU has a first round pick in your mind?
It's gonna be really, really close. I think you see defensive end and receivers as two of the premier positions in the NFL in every NFL draft. I think if you look back on it, I remember I looked at this at some point, but receivers are basically around 6 or like 5 to 7 in the first round taken. And obviously, I think you have like a top 4 or 5 in this draft as far as receivers go when you have Quentin Johnson, Jalen Hyatt, Jordan Addison, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Those are like your 4, and then after that, you're kind of shuffling. Like, do you how do teams view Kayshon compared to Josh Downs or Nathaniel Dell from Houston, like those type of players. I think that's what it's going to come down to, like you said, is the testing of Kayshon and how he looks, because coming off of that injury, while I think he got back to close to 100%, I had questions. I think everybody had questions about his, explosiveness, just how comfortable he was on the field. And I think it's kind of like a Derek Stingley situation, whereas he can be that player, but it's getting past the mental hurdle. It's getting back to where he was physically moving forward. And I think that was like the tape this year for Kayshon wasn't great. So, now that he is going into the draft, and there are a bunch of players that did put up really, really good tape, like the 5 players I mentioned, and I know Josh Downs was in and out at times with North Carolina hurt, and then Jackson Smith-Njigba was hurt a lot for Ohio State as well, but still, Kayshon played, to his credit. Like, he didn't sit out, he didn't opt out, but what did he do on the field? And it wasn't great. So I don't know. I don't think Kayshon goes first. BJ, maybe I could definitely see a team reaching on him. If anything, I think I could see a team reaching on him before Kayshon. I don't know
agree
if
with
that's
it.
fair or not.
It'll be interesting to see, and we'll learn a lot more about this. Look, the NFL draft deadline was a week ago, so we're kind of recapping that, giving you the 8 guys who decided to leave early. We'll touch later, like Maddie B said, I have an article coming on the guys whose eligibility was up. Ali Gay, Micah Baskerville, guys like that. I'm curious though what happens, because I feel very confident between Kayshon Boutte and Ojulari, there will be the first 2 players to get picked, unless something goes south there. Then I just don't know what to say, because you've got a group of Jay Ward, Mekhi Garner, Jaquelin Roy on the D line. And even if you want to toss Joray Jenkins in there, who's kind of being put around as a 3rd, 4th rounder, of how the order goes then. And Maddie B, I thought about this before the pod. I was going over some notes. I can almost make a case that any of them will be the next guy up. But for some reason, I just keep thinking Jaquelin Roy is a guy that's going to end up improving his stock enough to be that next guy up. And agree, disagree.
Yeah. The thing about Jaquelin Roy is last year, I'll never forget, after last year's draft, I did a story and I put it out, and I had just, basic projections of like, hey, Kayshon Boutte, 1st round guy, BJ Ojulari, 1st round guy. Like, I just went through those type of players from last year, projecting forward to the 2023 draft. And I had Jaquelin Roy in round 3 through 5. I think it was something like that. And, everybody came out the woodwork and said, hey, there's no way he goes that late. There's no way he's round 3, 4. And then all the mock drafts came out, the way too early mock drafts all
Those
came
are
out.
terrible.
They were like Jaquelin Roy, late 1st guy, like 1st round guy, this and that. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's see it. And I think Jaquelin Roy was really good for LSU this year. I'm definitely not taking anything away from him. I think he put out some solid tape, but he wasn't as dynamic as he was 2 years ago. 2 seasons ago, I should say. Like, he didn't pop out the way he did 2 seasons ago in a lot of ways. He had flashes for sure, but I just don't think overall from a consistency standpoint, he was at that level. And so he did drop a bit. I think defensive tackle, I looked it up historically, like defensive tackles going in the 1st round, like over the past, I think it was like 8 years or something like that. There's not many, like just true defensive tackles, like nose tackles. Like Jalen Carter will be drafted, obviously super high, but like after that, you're going to go with a couple more in the 1st round, and then 2nd round, it's kind of bare. And so really defensive tackle is a position where it's like either they're all in on you or they think they can take you at a later spot. And that's why I think it's an interesting position for Jaquelin Roy here, because I think he's really, really good and really talented, but maybe he does fall into the 3rd round.
I will say this, Jaquelin Roy was in the top 10. Mekhi Wingo, the other defensive lineman for him, was number 1 on this list, but in the top 10 for most snaps played this season for a defensive lineman. So he's going to have a lot of film out there just from this season. I mean, you could dig through obviously hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of snaps that he made this season. I also think when Mason Smith got injured, he had to play. There was no more moving Jaquelin around. He had to be that D tackle, even nose tackle at like look at times, and perhaps that's kind of affecting maybe what he would have done if he could have been on the edge or been playing Mekhi Wingo's position. We'll see. We'll see. I'm really intrigued though by Garner and Jay Ward. I love Jay Ward, and I think that the NFL folks, a guy like Jalen Mills reminds me of Jay Ward so much. And
Yeah.
I can't remember. Let's see when Jalen Mills got drafted. It may well have been late. He was a 7th round pick. Okay.
Yeah.
So a guy like him is still starting in the NFL. He's been with the Eagles, he's been with the Patriots, and has been a very important piece to the puzzle because he can play corner, he can play nickel, he plays safety, and that's what Jay Ward does. So I feel like Jay Ward obviously will hear his name called long before the 7th round. I'm just curious how much teams kind of really grow to like him after seeing really what all he did from the 2019 national championship season to now. And the same with Mekhi Garner, who, I mean, he came in as a transfer. He was a JUCO kid. Then he went to UL. Then he transferred to LSU, gets a year in the SEC, and was by far their best corner. I mean, it was clear. And he was consistent. He's physical. He can be a boundary guy for you. And if he goes up to the combine and runs well and tests well and all of that, he could start to sneak up boards. There's just always so many corners out there. So it just depends on who you fall in love with. And then the other two guys, Mike Jones Jr. and Anthony Bradford, we'll see. They're not really popping up on many mocks. Mike Jones had eligibility left and didn't even do a formal announcement, just kind of said after the bowl game that, hey, look, I've been at Clemson for a while. I've been at LSU for a while. I'm ready to at least go try my hand at the NFL. And then Anthony Bradford, who is a big offensive lineman, but he played right guard very well for him and played right tackle at times. Does the team go after him in the middle to the late rounds? I would say yes. But I think that you've always got the case where some of these guys could have improved their stock by coming back. But there's always situations where you wonder, would their playing time have remained the same? Or was this the time to go? So those are the 8 guys, not your top heavy list. This ain't the 2019 roster where you're going to have 4 or 5 guys up there at the same time in the first round, but still be a solid draft for them. And we'll see ultimately what the number ends at. I don't think they're going to hit double digits, but it could be close.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. That'll be an interesting situation here. I'm just looking at the exhausted eligibility lists moving forward. It's like Tremont Shorts, Ali Gay, Micah Baskerville, Jarek Bernard Converse, Colby Richardson, Joe Fuchsia, and Todd Harris. Like off the top of my head, I don't know how many of those get drafted.
Joe Fuchsia probably.
Sure. I couldn't
Baskerville.
tell you honestly. Sure.
Bernard Converse, Ali Gay.
You think all 4 of those get drafted?
I do. I think all 4 of those get drafted.
Okay. We'll see.